Yep.
So this is our research presentation where we're going to talk about the impact of low socioeconomic status on special education.
So, starting with the statement of the issue or problem, our topic is basically going over how in low socioeconomic areas there is a disproportionate level of students who are from low socioeconomic backgrounds that are placed in special education. This topic is critical to understand because when students are placed in special education, based on their socioeconomic levels, there's an overrepresentation of students who are placed in these classes. In higher income areas, school focus on high achievement level, and when students do not reach that level, they are wrongly placed in special education. We chose this topic because we wanted to take a deeper look at students from lower income families and how it affects their education. Rural areas of Montana face issues like low income, and we as a group wanted to look into this phenomenon to see how we can check our personal bias when working with students in the future. So going over our literature review, this is kind of like a summary of all of our sources because they all basically said the same information, but here are the key points. And so families in lower income areas do not exercise their right compared to families from higher income areas, meaning that low SES students are not receiving quality services. This is not the family's fault due to circumstance. They do not have the luxury to think about these issues, but because of it, students tend to fall behind and then are labeled in special education. And then in a large study of individuals 65 years and older, 20.9% of those without a disability failed to complete high school, compared to 25.1% and 38.6% of individuals with a non-severe or severe disability, respectively, who failed to complete high school. The Harvard Graduate School of Education found in their research that students from low income families were more likely to be identified for special education compared to their peers, specifically in categories like emotional disability compared to more objective categories like hearing impairment. Low-income students diagnosed with disabilities were more likely to be placed in separate classrooms than in the least restrictive environment. There is a positive correlation between poverty and special education assignment. There is an assumption in education that students from low-income families have higher rates of disabilities and therefore placed in special education. This is problematic because it allows for policymakers, researchers, and educators to ignore potential systematic biases that may also result in over-identification and low socioeconomic students in special education. So kind of just to go over that, like the main points that we were talking about and we found in our research goes over how students who come from low SES backgrounds, they already struggle with lower brain development and academic skills. And so because of that, when they go into the higher income districts and schools, because they're not up to par, I guess, with how I guess they want their level of achievement to be and what it is, just because they're not at that level of achievement, they aren't they're going to be classified as a special education student even if they actually have no disability. And like one thing we'll be going over is how a student may be classified and identified with a disability at one school, but then they'll go to another and they wouldn't be classified with one at all. So we're kind of just talking about how students are affected by biases and how that affects their education even later on in their life and their future.
So for our methods as a group, we decided to read a total of 12 different articles. Among the three of us, we split it into researching 4 individually. We chose to have a mixture of journal articles, both primary and secondary. A tool we used in analyzing the materials was Google Scholar and the Carroll Library database. By using these tools, using these tools that are at our disposal, we were able to have a well-rounded research that helps support our research question. Our group also found that in our research, we had to refine what we were looking for, and our central question pointed to different topics. We started by looking at the broad ideas of funding. This then led us down a path of slow socioeconomic status of families and the connection to special education. Then, as a group, we decided that this had a little to do with funding and more to do with disproportional representation of low-income students in the special education.
Now on to some of the results that we got from our research. Basically, the summarization of our results were that our research pointed that there is an obvious overrepresentation of students who come from low income families in special education. This is a quote that we pulled from our article, from one of our articles. It's kind of long, but the highlighted brown section is really kind of what we were wanting to focus on. One study found that while low-income parents were concerned about their children's education, they neither knew the formal terms of the statute, like what IDEA means and all of the access that we have or all the access that special ed students have, nor do they recognize the concepts when explained to them, because it just is outside of their lens of their worldview, because they don't have to focus on that all the time. So there is an obvious gap between these low income families and high income families, knowing what resources are available to them and how to access those resources. So this is kind of the process. This is from one of our articles. This is the framework of how you would decide if a student was eligible for special education under the IDEA Act. And so if you kind of follow those, but oftentimes it's misrepresented and it favors one way versus the other, more so favoring yes than no, because it's fascinating how we don't factor in every single component and just really focus on where students are at academically and not where they are socially, worldly, looking at other lenses that they experience. So then the brown part on this quote is existing research explores these topics that are limited in their scope because they either focus on a singular community or they measure income status using community-based factors rather than student-level data. And as Amber said earlier, when low-income families are put in high-income areas, it's often written off as them needing special education when that's not necessarily true. They just need somebody to help and advocate for them because they didn't have those predetermined structures that could have helped them to succeed. And then here, this is a different article. And this main point is researchers have found that students placed in substantially separate settings have worse academic outcomes than students who are placed in general education settings. And we know this from research we've done in class and things that we've talked about, where students need to be educated in their least restrictive environment, and pull-out programs are super beneficial, but also generalizing them into separated classrooms where it's just them all day long, not with peers, they're not getting the right structures and support they need, and it has a negative impact on them. So then when students are mislabeled as needing to be in special education, this creates a vicious cycle of setting them further off course, referring to this as a special education paradox. Students who are in those pull-out programs and receive extra support when they do not need them can be harmful long-term. And in most instances, it is those low-income students who do not have the proper access to these resources, and then they're misrepresented as being in special ed.
So some things we talked about to avoid this misrepresentation is always examine your personal basis. Try not to have your own opinions about your students and just kind of avoid all of that stigma about them. Compare student test results with the scores in the district's area. I think all states have their state testing, so you can always be comparing them where they should be, the average of the state, and about where they should be, where they're lying. Complete multiple professional evaluations. It's important to have more than just one professional come and kind of look at them, test them to make sure that it's not just you that's thinking that they're having a disability, but it's several other professionals as well. Create more inclusive lessons for those students who are below average learners. There are going to be students who have this, but make sure your lessons are still including them and are still capable, they are still capable of fulfilling these lessons. Brainstorm and collaborate with teams to discuss what is best for the student. That's why there are teams. That's why you collaborate with your coworkers with an IEP team. So then you know what's going to be best for that student instead of just throwing them in. Be innovative with your teaching. It's important to have fun with it, try new things, see what works, see what doesn't work. Even when students are challenging, do not write them off as needing special accommodations. Be rational and find the root of the problem. There are going to be students who struggle, but just because they're struggling doesn't mean that they need special accommodations. Our findings contribute to the solution because they're rooted in relational teaching, whereas teachers, we do not make assumptions. We build curriculum that will be beneficial to all types of learners. Just because one student came from a background of low income does not mean they are less capable compared to a peer who is of a higher income background. If it looks like they are behind, follow the correct testing process and factor in background. Find solutions that will help the students reach their maximum potential instead of hindering them behind.
And then this is our bibliography, and then this link follows to some more of our sources that we use that we didn't include on here. And thank you for watching.